All right, let's get to the markets now, see if it's looking better. But we'll see the NGX there, marginally down at intraday. But we'll have John McCraw with all the details right there with most of the markets we track. Good to have you, Ini.
Thank you, Ladi. Well, we can see it's marginally down today. Continuing from the sentiment it closed with yesterday anyways, even though, well, we're still believing, since it's marginally down, that perhaps something will happen. You know, interesting thing is we saw the Fugas, 4 of them were down yesterday, while 1 was unchanged. And one is tempted to ask if it has anything to do with some of the not so good news that's been going around the banks recently. I know a lot of people have experienced hitches with the apps, using the apps. And then we had that video on social media accusing one of the major banks of, you know, some
malpractices.
Malpractices, I guess we should put it that way, of different faces. But let's find out perhaps that is also affecting sentiment. You know, let's talk to, sorry, Ladi. Let me move to the guest. Good afternoon, everyone. Let's talk to Mr. Oju Demezue now. He's the Chief Executive Officer and Chief Consultant of Flame Academy joins us from Rwanda, where he is at this time. Mr. Demezue, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us this afternoon.
Good afternoon, my very good friend. How are you guys doing in Lagos?
I
don't live in Kigali. I only came to do some work. We conduct training programs all over Africa, particularly for banks and other big institutions. So thanks for having me in this segment. Good afternoon.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. And since you deal a whole lot with the banks, we're just curious. I know that you must have seen that video going on accusing a major bank of some malpractices that shouldn't be heard, abuse of data and all of that. And then now, and we also have a lot of apps. I think Access Bank is the latest to share a notice to say that their app will be off, will not be active for a couple of days because of maintenance and all of that. And I was just wondering if that's what's feeding into the sentiment that we see. We saw Fugas down even this afternoon. Doesn't look like the banking stocks have regained the confidence of the investors. Is this what's affecting them? Well, it looks like we're struggling with Mr. Demezue there. We'll see if we can get a better internet connection with him from Rwanda. And, well, hopefully we'll do that before the end of the program. So let's look at other markets now. We could have those numbers to see other parts of the continent. We see Johannesburg, it's in the green this afternoon, 0.04% up, retaining the 85. Not a lot of movement that we see right there. Look at other parts of the continent. Africa, Egypt, for instance, is in the red, 0.44% at 31% and 38.03. For Nairobi, they closed positive yesterday, 0.09% at 108. They've been like here, I mean, there's stability, but I mean, it gets boring when you see the market not moving that much. Move over to other parts of the world. You see in the Middle East, Dubai is green, 0.20%, 4,431.27. Abu Dhabi in the red this afternoon. Intraday, 9,268.06 is down 0.16%. The Tata war escapes that negative sentiment at intraday, 11,955.10. It's up 0.23%, while Qatar is back in the red like other markets. So mostly red is what we see for the market. So Qatar is 10,501.16 after it lost 0.08%. Let's see if we can have the other markets while we try to get Mr. Demezue to join us. Can we have other markets? I think the United States will be next. That we can see. There you have it, a red market in the US. We're expecting big economic data in the United States today, the CPI, inflation number. And a market is taking a back seat to see how that number will look like. Of course, then we'll see investors reacting. So we see the Dow Jones, the S&P 500, the NASDAQ, all in the red at intraday. We look at the Asia market now. better color than we had yesterday. Yesterday it was mostly in the red. Most of the markets were in the red. But this afternoon, the close of their trade is, we see them back. They recovered 0.26%. Kospi of Korea is 0.19%. The Hang Seng Index looking comfortable at 2.98%, 21,291. The Shanghai has been a place, to keep our eyes on for like 3 trading sessions now. So we see this looks a bit moderate compared to where we've been coming from. They've had big falls and big rises in the Shanghai market, but this afternoon it's just 1.32% there. And I think there was a close in some of the markets in Asia on Wednesday. They had a public holiday, so we see reactions to that. Also, Nifty of India is partially in the red, but really marginal, 0.01%. 24,980.25. Now, let's see if we can get Mr. Demeze back and to try to have that conversation. Hello, Mr. Demeze, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you better now. I had to change my network. Sorry about that, Hitch. I had to change from a Wi-Fi to my MTN network in Rwanda. And I think I'm very good to go right now. Can you hear me well?
Yes, I can hear you, and I hope that stays that way. So we're talking about sentiment around the banks, the banking stocks, following some of those not so positive or negative conversation that's been going on, especially in social media. Civil society group had come out to accuse one of the major banks of some malpractices and abuse of customers' data, and then now we're having some banks having issues with their apps, so customers cannot really use it. And we had one of the banks actually share a notice to inform their customers that there's going to be an upgrade or maintenance. And I was wondering if all of this is what's feeding to the negative sentiments we see on the counter, the banking counter at the NGX.
Right. The markets all over the world are facing some level of uncertainties. The global economy is still very fragile in terms of growth. There are concerns in Middle East where wars and escalations are coming up between Israel, Hamas in Gaza, and Hezbollah in Lebanon. And now with Iran throwing rockets, to Israel and, giving the world some concern about escalation. U.S. election is coming up. Russia, Ukraine, there's fight, that is subsisting. And in Africa, we have Sudan and a number of other places. And meanwhile, central banks around the world are also grappling with whether to cut rates or not to cut rates, monetary policy concerns, and so on. So, as you can see in your data, most markets around the world are facing, some changes, red today, green tomorrow, and all of that. So, Nigerian banking sector is not different from what's happening around the world. What I want to say is that the social media attacks on banks is very misplaced. Unfortunately, those people, you can imagine a civil society group trying to appraise banks as if they are regulators or conducting audits on banks. It's like if you have headache or you have malaria, you want to cure it, you cannot go to a mechanic. So they are not competent to tell people about what's happening in a bank. And from what I saw in that attack, I think it's just about bitterness. People who are bitter about one thing or the other, who are trying to find a way to pull a bank down. Unfortunately, they are picking on the wrong bank. They are picking on the most profitable bank in Nigeria at the moment, a bank that has the best cost-to-income ratio, management efficiency, with very strong capital adequacy, asset quality, if you understand that. Other businesses are not like banking business. Banking business is unique in the way it is run, and therefore in the way it's appraised. People who are not technically sound in appraising banks might be looking at noise making as a way of a bank being sound. A bank can be very silent, doing its work professionally, and and be very, very strong at the same time. So all the rumors should be jettisoned. They are the work of maybe sore losers of very badly advised errats and distractors and maybe troublemakers. Coming to the issue of disturbances in banks' apps, I'm aware right now the number of banks are trying to upgrade their systems. I know a bank that's trying to move to a Finacle banking software. The other bank you mentioned are also trying to upgrade their systems, their apps, to strengthen them in terms of cybersecurity, because every other day the world is seeing more and more attacks on businesses. So cybersecurity is becoming a big issue. So you see banks trying to quickly update their systems, and protect their banking softwares better. The issue of data misuse is very, very wrong and is very false. Banks have the oath of confidentiality to manage customer data. And the much I know about Nigerian banks, they don't take that lightly. Right from the big, too big to fail banks, and even the second tier and third tier banks. No bank can afford, or they can ill afford, to mismanage customer information. So what?
Wow, looks like we lost Mr. Ademize in spite of the change he did to the network that he's using there. Mr. Ademize, are you back? Can you hear me? Can you hear me, Mr. Ademize?
I can hear you now. This is from your own end. My end is strong here, I believe.
Okay, all right, you're back. Do you want to complete your thoughts, or do I just ask you the next question? Well, I think I should just go ahead and ask the next question, Mr. Ademize. So whether people believe this or whether it is true or not, some of those stories of abuse and abuse of data and all of that, we know that investors are very sensitive. Is there a way you think these negative sentiment or perception could be corrected? Do we need a regulator to talk? Do we need to see numbers from the banks, operation costs and all of that? Do we need anything like that, to try to change the perception that may have gone wrong?
Okay, I think the central bank came out with some statements some days ago to say that Nigerian banks are sound. And in fact, in my view, anybody who watches the economy very well, you find that despite the economic downturn we have in the country, banks are still reasonably stable in their profitability and their outcome and even our outlook. You find that in the banking sector, they don't take human capital development lightly. And that's why that sector is still surviving in Africa. Most African businesses set up billions of businesses without preparing human capital that will run those businesses. You find that most people that even run businesses today in Nigeria were trained in the banking sector. So that sector remains strong. And the post-2008 or 2007, 2009 financial crisis, the regulation of banking, which is now risk-based, has ensured that most banks, if not all the banks, are always very strong at their point in time. You hardly see a bank now failing, except the ones that have been sick for a very long time. So these attacks that are happening online are misplaced, and they're happening at a very wrong time. Yes, the economy around the world is not very stable, but if in Nigeria, the banking sector is one of the most stable businesses you can find. So I don't think investors need to panic. That sector is still doing well. And as the banks try to issue more shares to raise more capital, we want to see them very soon upping their game to play bigger in Africa, because I know that a lot of Nigerian banks are playing all over Africa, and the opportunities for them are endless. So these distractors or rumor mongers or troublemakers should find another sector to carry out their trade. The banking sector in Nigeria is very strong, and their outlook is also very strong in my own assessment. To assess a bank, you don't look at physical things. They are what we call CAMEL framework for assessing banks' performance. Only very people can understand the CAMEL framework, not a civil society organization and so on. C, meaning capital adequacy. A, asset quality. M, management efficiency or management capability. Then earnings capability and liquidity of banks. Of course, sensitivity analysis. The central bank assesses Nigerian banks on a regular basis on these CAMEL frameworks. All right, so branch network, number of customers, customer service are all other parameters, but the core regulatory parameters for checking how healthy a bank is the CAMEL framework. And I hope these civil society organizations can consult people like us to put them through these measurements so that they can speak rightly and stop the concoction of half-truths and lies to try to fight a bank, perhaps, that they may not be in love with.
All right, so Mr. Ademize, thank you so much for your perception and your views right there. Well, our job here is to put it out there for the consumers, depositors, and investors to follow up. But thank you so much for sharing that information with us.
Thanks always for having me on your shows, Ini.